I think it's fair to say that reality is finally sinking in. It's now been more than 3 months since the start of the lockdowns. Even though there are several promising vaccines in the pike, non-healthcare workers or first responders are looking at maybe sometime next year for a possible vaccine. No economy can stay in lockdown for a year or until a safe and effective vaccine becomes readily available to the masses. There's only so much social distancing, a mask, and hand washing can do to prevent the spread of COVID. Is there another option? Last week on the show, I did a follow-up to the roundup of adventure travel industry leaders, and while they are seeing some green shoots and that hope is wonderful, for us to really start traveling again, we need to feel safe. And barring the hope for vaccine, one way to make us feel safe is for us to be able to quickly stamp out any new outbreaks, and a way for us to do this could be contact tracing. So today we're going to discuss what the heck contact tracing is, how it might work, how we can protect our privacy, and how contact tracing might allow us to more quickly get on with our lives and back on the road. So let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. It's interesting how life causes pivots. We learned last week how Active Adventures, Austin Adventures, and BikeTours.com had to totally pivot their businesses to get through this COVID crisis. My friends Mary Charleson and Barb Cameron have also pivoted their businesses since the outbreak. They now find themselves combining their love of travel with their travel blogs and marketing business, combining that with their previous corporate background and marketing skills, and are now helping companies forge a new path due to the virus. Mary Charleson has been a marketing consultant, speaker, and writer at 5minutemarketing.com for the last 20 years. Since launching carryonqueen.com in 2018, which is a travel content site for female adventure travelers over 50, she has recently merged her two passions through writing, consulting, and speaking about how the travel industry will recover from the pandemic. Barbara Cameron, who provided the genesis for this article and contributed much of the research, was formerly a business analyst on the global IT team for Colliers International, tasked with implementing GDPR privacy principles and rights within the global digital ecosystem. And that GDPR, if you're not familiar with that term, that's why you're getting all these cookie notifications and all that. It's a privacy protection that was put in place in the European Union that is pretty much being used as a standard worldwide, just to make things a little simpler for us. So anyway, so that's what that is. So prior to working on the GDPR privacy principles, she traveled to 17 countries over 6 continents for a year abroad as a travel photographer and writer. Barbara now leads a food and travel photography website, BarbaraCameronPics.com, and collectively, as members of the BC Association of Travel Writers, British Columbia Association of Travel Writers, both bring years of experience and insight to a topic yet to be widely explored by the travel industry. They wrote a terrific article, a link of which will be in the show notes that I encourage you to read that goes more in depth than what we're talking about today. I also encourage you to go to the website where I have some additional information for you as well. And that will be at activetravelaadventures.com/contact tracing. So with that, let's get started with the show. So Mary and Barb, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm pleasure to be with you today, Kit.
Likewise, too. Great to see you.
Thanks. I guess before we start, a lot of us, this whole COVID thing is new. Why don't we start by just identifying what the heck is contact tracing and why do we even care?
Barb, you want to hit that one off? Because you're the tech girl.
Sure. So right now, Kit, of course, public health authorities are trying to identify people who might have been infected so that they can try to prevent the spread of this disease, right? They want to try to contain it. Typically what's happening right now is that it's a manual process where if somebody tests positive, the public health authorities then ask them, who have you been with? Where were you? Et cetera, et cetera. And then they're on the phone and they're trying to track people down. It's very manual. It's very time intensive. It's not at all private because you do have to disclose where you were and when and maybe with whom. And it just takes a lot of time and it may not actually reach everybody because you may, I was on a ferry the other day, so I'm doing a little bit of local travel. I was on a ferry. They're very, very careful to make sure that there's social distancing, but I was on a ferry for 2 hours with people I don't know. say I did get it and then I disclosed it to my public health and they wanted to know who I've been with, I can't identify those people. So those people would never know with a manual contact tracing situation that they may have been exposed. Contact tracing is all about trying to prevent the spread of this disease and rein it in so that we can manage it. And right now, most of it is being done manually. There's quite a few countries or regions that are creating their own technology. And that's why Mary and I were talking about it, because I personally believe that there's a better way than having all of these different regional technologies. And I think it will help us travel better.
Other comments, Mary?
Really, as Barbara said, as this thing gets bigger and less easy to kind of trace manually, it really demands some sort of system and a coordinated effort. Especially, it's not just for global travelers, it's for anybody. This is up here in Canada, you've seen it in states in the US. Everyone's trying to control things regionally in their own little area, and it becomes very, very difficult when people are starting to cross even state and province lines, let alone country lines, to contain things and have a well-coordinated information, right?
I can see how that can become a confusing mess. So in your article, you talked about centralized and decentralized contact tracing. Tell us a little bit about that and why it's important that we know the difference.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of like technology terminology, there are the two different types of data storage. So in a decentralized data storage system, all of the data is down, say, at the device level. Whereas a centralized is all of the data would end up being in one central server. So there's two different ways to approach it. And I know that some regions are using centralized and some are using decentralized. I know that the National Health Service in the UK is using more of a centralized system. And so all of your data is being sent to a central server that the public health authorities can access. Whereas if it's decentralized, so I don't have my phone on me right now, but the decentralized system that I recommend, all the data is on your own device. And it's your choice if you want to share it. And you would only really do that if you did test positive. So I can get into that. Would you want me to sort of explain?
Yeah, I'd like to talk, because I know one of the big concerns people have is about their privacy. Mm-hmm. And we don't want necessarily the government, or if it got in the wrong hands, people knowing where we are, who we are, doesn't access our medical data and threaten us in any other kind of way. So if you could talk about the whole privacy issue and then how that's making you skew towards you like the decentralized.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you kind of, it's not really a funny story, but it's really illustrative. So what's happening right now where I live, which is in British Columbia, Canada, there's a news report that's getting a lot of play because there was somebody who tested positive after attending a strip club. And so, of course, on the news, they're saying, if you attended this strip club on this day between these hours, you need to raise your hand. And that's not at all private. I mean, it's you have to actually disclose that you were in a location that maybe you don't want people to know you were in, for example, or maybe with somebody. It's very not private. It's wide open. You have to disclose where you were at a certain time, certain day, etc. With the decentralized technology that which Google have created together, it's completely anonymous data that stays on your phone until such time as maybe that I was in proximity with. It doesn't tell me where I was. It's just that maybe I was in proximity with somebody for 5 minutes or 5 hours, if from 100 meters away or 500 meters away. And it's very anonymous, doesn't tell who I am, where I was, who they are or where they were. But if our phones were in proximity, and if one of those people who owns that phone ends up testing positive and chooses to disclose that, then my phone will get a little notice saying, hey, Barb, you were in proximity with somebody who has tested positive for COVID. You were within 500 meters for 30 seconds. You probably don't have to do anything. Or, hey, Barb, you were in proximity with someone for 2 hours from about 20 meters away. You might want to go get tested. It doesn't tell me who, it doesn't tell me where, when, It just tells me I may have been in proximity with somebody who was tested. To me, that's the way we need to go globally, because it crosses borders and it's completely private and voluntary. If you want to share that, let's say I decide I'm not feeling well and I get tested and I test positive, I voluntarily share that information. Then I don't have to.
How does it tell if I'm just driving in the car and the person next to me tests positive? I mean, it seems like we would get all sorts of false positives or false alerts. And
it doesn't tell you that immediately. Okay, so how it works is that our phones, if we have the technology enabled in our phone, and again, we can choose to or not, it sends little Bluetooth beacons. So if you and I are driving beside each other on a highway, your phone and my phone, if we pass, it's going to send a little anonymous beacon of data. And that just sits on my phone. And every 20 minutes, it gets randomized as well. So it's very, very private. So then maybe a week later, I test positive. And I just somehow the app will say you can disclose that you're positive. I press a button or something, and it sends data to the public health authority, and then they will be able to find every phone that has that random data within the last 14 days, and just send a little notice to your phone.
But would it say you passed Barbara for a split second so that we realized that probably was a car and not?
Yeah, it would.
It's gotten that detail that it could tell us, so that we don't get every week we're getting something because everybody's driving around and
and you're not getting a notice every time you pass somebody. Only if that person ultimately ends up testing positive, chooses to disclose it, and you were in any proximity with them in the last 14 days. Gotcha. So you're not going to get notice of everybody you pass by in a car. Not at all. Not at all.
If this continues to grow, as it very, very well might,
yes,
it might get to be where 80% of the population at one time or another has either gotten it or has gotten the antibodies or something like that, I would imagine. I don't know how the Spanish flu did, but this is not a little baby problem.
You're correct. However, my belief is that if we enable this contact tracing, or I call it exposure notification, that's what Apple and Google are calling it, because it isn't about tracing your contacts. It's about notifying you if you've been exposed. And the more we adopt it, the sooner and the broader it gets, the more we will all know or stay home or get tested, and we can stop the spread of this, I think, if we all adopt it globally.
Mary, are you on board with this exposure notification? That sounds a lot more pleasant to participate in.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, as Canadians, perhaps we're a little bit more, we buy into belief in government institutions. It's just kind of the way we are. But we're also very guarded about our privacy and our information. And I will admit completely to being a little bit reluctant around this, because I know enough about marketing and the sharing of data and data mining to know that most of us don't really consider the degree to which marketers can trace and purpose data and whatnot. And so I initially went into this with, I would say, skepticism. And particularly skepticism around having big companies like Apple or Google involved, simply because of that whole kind of history around marketing and what they do. As we got digging into the research more, that's when I started to change my viewpoint to very much what Barb is saying, in that their system, what they've put out there, would enable something which is much more global, and it doesn't put the data in the hands of independent governments, which, if you're from a country or government where you believe you can trust them, that's one thing. But we all know as travelers, there are many different types of government institutions, regional approaches to this stuff, where your data might not be safe. And so the whole concept of having it decentralized to me absolutely makes sense. And then being able to coordinate the sharing of the data to me makes sense. Not, like I said, not just even just from a citizen perspective, but if we're going to put this into work for travel, and let's face it, the travel industry is hurting big time. And until we can get planes moving on a scale where they're more full than half, and even now, I think I was talking to Terry Jones, who founded Expedia, and he said after 9/11, planes were down 70%. Traffic was down 70%. He said now they were down 90%. right? They're trying to recover back. I know in Canada, we just got word of, the third seat is going to start to be filled as of July 1st, right? Different companies are handling it in different ways. But ultimately, until those planes can move people en masse in a global perspective, the travel industry really can't recover other than on the domestic side. And I don't see how we can start doing that when a pandemic is still kind of raging on without having some sort of care and responsibility, not only for the people who are on board, but also for the airlines to be able to say in good conscience, yes, we need to stay in business, but we also care about our passengers.
Now, you've sold me on this decentralized, what do we call that again? Exposure notification. However, most things tend to come with unintended consequences. Have Apple, Google, you and Barb thought about what are the possible unintended consequences of doing this mass exposure app?
Well, I'll just speak to just briefly and then let Barb go after. But as in anything that starts off as a temporary measure, we all know that taxes were a temporary measure at some point. We also know that we made a lot of changes after 9/11 in terms of security that we have maintained. And so, yes, we can say contact tracing is something that we're bringing in for a pandemic, but I think we would be foolish to think that there aren't changes that will be made now that won't have lasting repercussions for our global travel going forward. Will contact tracing be part of it? That could be the devil's advocate, kind of saying, could it continue? Perhaps it could. We're getting into all sorts of bigger ethical issues here, but I know absolutely without a doubt that travel will never be the same. It's a 9/11 moment on steroids. And we made concessions then to our privacy and our data that we wouldn't have thought of doing ever before after 9/11. And then we got used to it. This is our data, but it's related to our health. And so, I still have reservations around it too, right? I mean, on some level, whether we start getting into where it's attaching to your passport and, there's all sorts of weird stuff where this could go if it was maintained. Barb, do you want to speak to that a bit or?
I'm sort of thinking about the question, Kit, that you pose. I honestly haven't gone that far to think of the unintended consequences. Where my brain goes is, even if we all do this exposure notification, and even if we all have this ability to know maybe that we should get tested or whatever, then what happens? So even if we do get on an airplane and get to, I want to go to Portugal so bad. It's just in my blood. I have to get back there. So great. What if I have this technology and what if I get there? And then what if I get to Portugal and I find out that someone on the plane did test positive? Then what? Right? So then it just brings up so many more questions about how we're going to travel. So if I am in another country, am I able to access testing there? Am I able to access medical systems there? Do I have to disclose to their public health authorities? And how do I? It just brings up so many other questions. And Mary and I have sort of grappled with it. And we're like, well, we'll get there. I mean, there's another technology that I'm hearing about. And this one is what freaks me out quite a bit more than exposure notification. And it's called immunity passports. So there's this idea floating that we would all, instead of just our passport, we would have an immunity passport. And so to cross the border, we would have to flash some kind of something that says, yes, she's clean, or she's been tested, or she's already had it and she has the antibodies. That freaks me out way more than anything else.
And they don't even know if the antibodies are going to last for a month or a lifetime yet. They still don't know enough. But now Singapore has had great success using this contact tracing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I know a speaker friend of mine was living in Singapore when early on, and I remember seeing some Facebook posts that she shared, and it was quite far reaching, but they started it very early on. And I do believe, and everybody bought into it, and I do believe it had a significant impact on controlling things early on.
Many Asian countries remember well the H1N1, the swine flu, the SARS that devastated their areas. And so they were more prepared for a pandemic because they've gone through, not as extreme, but they've gone through epidemics of a serious nature in the last couple of decades. And they had a plan in place, unlike a lot of Western countries. To put this in perspective, at the time of this recording, Singapore had just over 45,000 cases and just 26 deaths. Portugal, a similar number of cases, had 1,629 deaths. That's 62 times more deaths for the same number of cases. That's the power of contact tracing. So because of Singapore's contact tracing, it's allowed them to maintain their economy and go about their lives, because once somebody does test, and they have a different kind of government, so they're able to pull this off easier than some other countries might be able to. But because of that, they were able to contain it right away, and it didn't crash their economy, and they had very few deaths, etc. So at its extreme, it works really, really well. If this stays in the hands of Google and Apple, who presumably were going to be the white knights, if it gets in the hands of governments, I can see how that could be there's just a lot of fluidity there that kind of makes me a little bit tenuous. Although I'm doing an app right now, one of these research apps for COVID, that every day I tell them whatever it is, because they've already got my data for a breast cancer study that I've been doing for 10 years. So I'm open to allowing people to spy on me if that will help the planet. But I also am concerned, because it's just going down that slippery slope of what's next.
No, Barbara, my understanding is because I know I saw my latest update on my because I've got an Apple iPhone, and so I got the automatic updates, and I did see it actually come in, and there is actually a place that I could turn on.
Really?
Yes,
really? On your phone already?
There is. I left my phone up in the bathroom, or I can lead you through where it is, but you can't actually activate it until there's an app attached to it. So my understanding is that there will be Canada's talking about doing an app, so then it would utilize Apple's thing on the back end. And where I got alerted to it was a girlfriend had posted on Facebook, and it was her Google phone, and said, it automatically put this thing in it, and it was automatically turned to on. And I thought, that's a little,
that's a little invasive. Yeah.
I know, that's kind of like, what was the band that got in trouble with automatic download? I can't think of the name of the time when it was, but it was the presumption that you wanted it for free. So I did see it. I checked it on Apple. It's not automatically set to go on. You have to actually manually go in and turn it on. But in the last update, it is there, and it's somewhere in settings, and I think it's settings and health.
Wow. And
then within that, it has a thing for tracing. But you can't turn it on unless there's an app that is attached to it.
Right. So, that's actually very interesting to me. I'm going to go check mine. So the way that Apple and Google originally announced that they would launch it is that they would provide what's called an application programming interface, or API for short. For anybody who was building an app, they could use this API to provide the actual foundational technology, which is what Canada is doing. So
I think that was an update. Yeah.
So Justin Trudeau a couple weeks ago announced that Canada is launching it in a test format right now, and it is completely based and built on that Google Apple API. And then their further plans were to launch it as part of operating systems. So that's really interesting. But even if it is part of an operating system, and yes, they did say you were going to have to turn it on or off, it does still need to align with a regional app, so that if you do want to disclose that you have been tested positive, you are able to submit that data to your regional public health authority.
And so it works like tentacles, so that it could cross borders, counties, states, countries, etc. And that makes sense.
Yes.
So at this point, what do you think, where we are right now, what do you think it's going to take for us to open our borders and to stop the 14-day quarantines?
That's a loaded question, Kit.
It is. Says somebody who's chomping at the bit to travel and wants to know. Right. Well, what are your thoughts on that? This is, of course, it's opinion at this point.
I think it's really interesting because, in Canada, it's fascinating for us because, yes, we still face a 14-day quarantine. So as an example, if I want to go to the States, we're not supposed to go except if it's for, necessary travel. I could go, but when I come back, I need to find some place to be. I was supposed to be going down to a conference in Louisiana in October, and I'm thinking, if I do that, I'm going to come back like a piece of plutonium. I'm going to have to like check into a room. Like my family's not going to want me, notwithstanding the fact that do I really want to expose myself to that? That is a genuine concern. And so I think and I think, and I was reading the European Union, I don't know if they've made it official yet, but I've certainly seen quite a few trial balloons around saying that they were going to not be welcoming American tourists as of July 1st, I believe. I don't know if that is official now, but it was certainly looking like it was going to be official. Like, that's really big news because like their economy needs travel and Americans are huge travelers. Canada, Australia, we're on safe lists, but those are also countries that, like, if we go to Europe, like, we have a 14-day quarantine. So there's all this weird stuff going on, and really what's driving the need to open the borders is sustainability of our tourism within domestic markets. I mean, there's, Canada and the United States are fortunate in that we have a relatively healthy group of economically of people that can travel domestically and spend their money domestically. But there's a lot of regions in the world that don't have that, just built in. And so Europe is trying to make it so people can move within Europe and trying to keep that kind of safe, right? So there's all this regionalism going on. And to me, the only way you're going to get beyond that is obviously, widespread testing, all that kind of thing. But I do think that a tracing application of some sort, ideally globally coordinated, is one of the pieces. It's not the ultimate solution, but it's a piece of the solution. Otherwise, I just don't see how we can open borders. I just don't see how it can happen. And we want to be able to go to the States. We want to be able to welcome Americans here. But right now, like, if you were to stop 10 people on the street, like, they don't want. You don't want me? I'm sorry, they don't want you.
and folks, and pre-recording, they already said I wasn't allowed there. So.
You know what? We love Americans. They great travelers, spend lots of money. I've got relatives. Like, honestly, it hurts me to not be able to welcome with open arms international travelers. But at the same time, you have, I know in the province of BC, we've made extraordinary efforts and gains as a region. Dr. Bonnie Henry has been the head of our public health efforts, and we've been informed by science from the start, and it's been very, very coordinated government efforts. And we should have been one of the worst. We have a lot of people that come and go from China. We have a huge group of people in the Lower Mainland that come and go from Asia who have family roots there. That's where it first broke out. Washington State had a whole bunch of things just across the border in Seattle. They were one of the first U.S. hotspots. We had a lot of traffic coming. Like, we, for all intents and purposes, should have been in a really rough spot. But BC, through good management, has come out in one of the top regions. And so there's a lot of feeling that people want to maintain the gains that have been achieved. They want to let down their guard and give that away just for the sake of tourism. I mean, it's an economic as much as it is a public health thing.
And going back to what Barb said earlier, if you're traveling and then you find out, you get a little ping, oh, on that plane you were on, you were exposed, and now you're in another country, what do we do?
I know, it's that whole, like, it's the rights and responsibilities, right?
It's not your home. It's I mean, what do you do? I guess, where do you even quarantine? And who's paying for it? A lot of times people, they used everything they had of their credit to get to wherever it is they went. Who's paying for it?
You know what? There are no easy answers, right? Yeah. Barb and I, we came up with far more questions around it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, if we really want to stop this, like, if we really, really collectively want to stop the spread of this disease and open up our economies again, personally, I think we have to quarantine again, like lock down for another 3 to 6 months. I really do. I think we all want to go and we want to move, and we've been in for 3 months and we want to go and we want to cross those borders and we want to stimulate the economies. But I think if we sort of stayed in our homes for another 3 to 6 months, we'd stop it. But that's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. We know that.
They can't afford to. All those places will all go under. All these little mom and pop, particularly as Mary was saying earlier, if tourism is the lifeblood of the country, they're starving right now.
Yeah, I agree. So the second step is that we know that wearing masks washing hands, staying physically distanced are the three primary ways to avoid contact. People aren't doing that. Unfortunately, probably 80% are, but there's always that 20% that aren't. If it were mandatory that we had to wear a mask when we were outdoors, we would be stopping the spread and we could be moving about, but people aren't doing that and they're not distancing. So, there are simple ways that we could do this, but we are complex people. Human beings are not simple. We're complex. We want to do things our own way. So to me, it's kind of like, okay, stay home. No, we're not going to do that. Make it mandatory to wear masks and stay 6 feet away from each other. It's kind of hard to do sometimes. Okay, so then we go to the exposure notification. Maybe that's the next step so that at least we know if we're safe or not. And then, what's next? What are those rights and responsibilities if we do start as a Canadian citizen? If I go to Portugal, am I going to be able to get healthcare easily, or are they going to say, sorry, we're just going to do our own resident? Because I'm on the list. Canada can travel to the European Union right now. We are okay. But I'm not ready to go because I have too many questions at that other end. I know I'm not going to get travel insurance to cover anything that would happen. I don't know what's going to happen at the other end. There's just too many unknowns.
So Mary, you want to tell us what they're doing in Cambodia?
So Cambodia's taken it to a whole new level. They requiring people to basically give a deposit, $3,000 upon arrival to cover the cost of testing, possible quarantine, and essentially what they're doing is they're downloading the cost to travelers if they happen to be traveling and testing positive. Obviously, that's not going to put Cambodia at the top of the gotta go travel destinations. What it is doing is saying they're playing hardball with the citizens, or if they're returning there. Again, I don't know. What do you think about it, Kit?
Well, as a country that probably can't afford to keep taking care of people, I get where they're coming from, and so I imagine it's only going to attract the business people that have to go there, or the wealthy people who can afford to. And if they can afford to, then why should Cambodians be picking up the tab for treating somebody that may be bringing the disease to the country? So they're free to do what they want, and then it's their rules, as long as you know the rules before you get there. I mean, I would hate to buy the ticket and then get there and say, oh, give me $3,000. As long as it's up front and you know the rules, they make it $50,000, do whatever they want. Nobody's going to pay it, but they have, in my opinion, the right to do whatever they want as they see fit, as long as people know what the ground rules are prior to purchasing the ticket.
I have a really good friend who has been a travel agent since the 60s, and she only deals with the wealthy clientele. So she creates luxury experiences for her clients. I mean, to the tune of sometimes $500,000 trips. And so I was talking with her about all of this recently. Of course, her business has taken a hit as well. And she had to refund a lot of people. She had to arrange refunds for anyways. In her view, and I think, Mary, you and I have spoken about this as well, that the target market that's going to travel first is the wealthy clientele, because they can afford to pay for an entire row of an airplane, for example, if they wanted to, or they can go to the luxury hotels that you tend to think maybe do a really better job of cleaning or a great job of cleaning and sanitizing. And a lot of the hotel chains, if you've noticed, have started doing collaborative efforts with like Lysol or cleaning companies. I find that fascinating. But anyway, so I think that the first wave of travel will be luxury travel, and or the young 20-year-olds who are invincible and they'll just go because they don't believe they're at risk, right?
I think Mary and I are going to add one more group to that, right, Mary? The adventure traveler.
Yes,
because they're outdoors and they're a little bit intrepid to begin with. So I think we'll see that because they're going to be safer. Now, I did talk to Dan Austin from Austin Adventures yesterday, and he said that people are driving in instead of flying, and the wealthy are chartering planes. So they just started doing their trips this month, and so that's how they're getting there to start the adventure.
Yeah, no, I think that the adventure traveler, just by demographic, psychographic nature, is a little bit more comfortable with a level of risk. And let's face it, until this pandemic has either run its natural course, or we've achieved herd immunity, or we have a vaccine, there is going to be a calculated amount of risk. And some people are just more comfortable with a higher level of risk, period. And so I think that's really what this is going to expose. And so, yes, there will be people who will travel. And probably right now is probably, well, I don't know if it's safer right now because now it's starting to open up a little bit more. But I was thinking, the last couple of weeks, when planes are less than half full and nobody's tracing, nobody's doing anything, it's like, you know what, this is probably the window. And come fall, once the airlines, they have to function at 70% capacity or they're losing money. Federal funds are due to run out at the end of September in the United States. I'm not sure what Canada is, but it's got to be pretty darn close. Virgin Airlines filed for bankruptcy. There's going to be airlines that go out of business, go bankrupt, or consolidate in the fall. And then there's going to be pressure to fill in those seats in some capacity, or prices have to go up. It's one of the two, because they can't continue selling cheap fares, half full planes with distancing and accepting government money. It just won't work. So one of those things will have to happen to get people back into planes. And so, yes, that will be fuller and the prices will be higher, likely. And honestly, if you were 20 right now and you wanted to go to Europe and you're Canadian, it's like, yeah, maybe just do it, right? Just go for it. Or 45 and in Invincible, and you're going to be going hiking and outdoors, and you're not, you've got your own place to stay. It might actually be that window because there's not the second wave. The airlines are still flying. They still have money, and nobody's getting all crazy about tracing, which I think is a piece of it, but it's going to be an awkward, bulky piece of it once it tries to be coordinated on a global scale. And so right now we're at that weird little window where it's might actually be okay.
I also think that one of the silver linings of this whole mess is that for the first time in literally decades, places that have been over-touristed, that are no longer fun to go to, are now empty. And so if you've got the nerve and if you've got all your ducks in a row and can protect yourself as best you can, it's a wonderful opportunity to see things in a way they haven't been able to be viewed in 50 years.
You know what? The altruistic thing side of me says, maybe this isn't a bad thing. You've got places like Venice where so many people have, moved away. They're renting their places on Airbnb because of the capacity, because of the opportunity. Maybe having your city back where you actually have artists, musicians, you've got people who are like functioning in that city that are actually living and working there, maybe that's not a bad thing. And maybe that not having all of the cruise lines coming in there one after another every single day, maybe that's not a bad thing. In Belize, right? Like maybe not having all the ships, all the planes coming in all the time, and those economies that have become dependent on, they're so out of whack. I mean, you saw that in Peru as well, Kit, where, somebody can make the same amount of money selling trinkets in the square as they can mining the salt field for a month, right? That's just wrong. And maybe what this will do is force those economies to be a little bit less reliant on international travel and actually kind of heal themselves into being a bit more self-sufficient. And then when we do travel, and maybe it will be more of a choice of not as frequent, but when you go with intent and you interact on an authentic level with those countries, you know what, maybe that's not a bad outcome.
And I think they'll appreciate the tourist again, because in the over-touristed places, we're a bane to their existence for all the reasons you just discussed. But I hate that they have to suffer like this. But they will appreciate the tourist dollars coming back, hopefully at a more moderated level, so that they can still enjoy the cities and villages that they loved and now feel like a puppet on display.
It's interesting. I saw on the news that, I don't know if you saw it, Barb, I think it was CBC did a thing on Venice just recently, right? And I was in Venice 2 summers ago, and I wanted to see Venice, and it was like at the tail end of a big grand tour with Europe with my daughter and driving tour, and it was hot, it was crowded, we did our best to get to some of the outer islands and stuff, but at the end of it, I was like, I'm really glad I went, but I'm not sure I'd ever want to go back. That was my lasting impression, just because it was just over touristed. The same thing with Machu Picchu, right? I mean, did the trek to Machu Picchu, the trek was the memorable experience. The actual Machu Picchu was amazing, but it was so many people. So I likened it at the end of the day when the buses started to load. It was like somebody flushed the bathtub and all the water ran out, right? Like everyone is like flooding out of Machu Picchu. They're a victim of their own success. And, they're attracted so many tourists and dollars, because, to help fund the revitalization as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Like all of those things were needed, but it really has invited over tourism, right?
And that was me with the Sphinx in Egypt last year. I was like, in hindsight, not even in hindsight, while I was there, I was like, I think I'd have saved $5,000 and done a lot better off watching a documentary. I'd have gotten closer without all the people. It didn't rock my boat, as impressive as it was. Just too many people. It's just too touristy. It's a shame. So we got off track about the contact tracing and all that. Any final thoughts about things that we should have discussed about this that we didn't cover, or thoughts about travel in the future?
I just personally, I've talked with friends and other people about this, and I find that the reaction is that it's a fearful reaction to this technology that could save us. And so I get a little frustrated because I took the time to look into it, and Apple and Google have I don't work for these people, but that what they've done is they've created a very simple but elegant technology. They have been completely transparent. Anybody can go read all of the information. It's all in layperson's terms. It's not scary. It's not Big Brother. And I really believe that if people take 10 minutes to actually read through it, they'll understand that this is the best solution for us to be able to move forward. And instead of reacting out of fear and not having the right knowledge, I just urge people to actually go take a look. It's all online. Just research Apple, Google, contact tracing. It's at your fingertips.
I tell you what, if you can send me the link, I'll put the link to that in the show notes, along with all the links to your websites and your social tags and all that, so people can reach out to you both as well and find out more about your different businesses. In fact, why don't we talk? Mary, did you have any final thoughts as well?
Well, I just wanted to we need to be able to travel to live our lives, right? I mean, travel experiences are those things that enrich and change us. And, right now we're being denied a lot of that other than domestically. And so I think any systems or protocols, anything that can enable us to get back out there and travel and share, enrich our lives, and also the lives of the others that we interact with, and impact their economies in a positive way. Any piece of that, I think, is a positive part of the solution. And I believe that contact tracing is a part of it. Not the ultimate solution, but is a part of the solution. And so to me, that's really what I want for us all, is to be able to get back out there.
The article that you guys wrote was outstanding. So of course, I'll have links to that in the show notes as well. Before we take off, why don't you take a moment each and tell us a little bit about what's going on next in your career and what you're working on, so we know what to look forward to.
Oh, okay. I'll go ahead. I actually am doing what, in BC, we're in what we're calling our phase 3 recovery, which is where we're sort of given the permission to move around a little bit more freely. So I am on my second local road trip in the last couple of weeks. So that's what I'm doing. I really have the travel bug. I really want to get out, and I really want to support our economy. And so I'm doing all the local travel that I've actually wanted to do for many, many years. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. I'm taking a lot of photographs. I'll be blogging about them. I'm talking to people as I'm meeting them. I'm observing what's happening. So like in Tofino, which is like a world-renowned destination that usually, a year ago would have been teeming with people on a Monday in June. It was quite relatively easily to move around. And so it was quite lovely, and you could talk to the locals and stuff. So I just really encourage people to do some local travel too, while we're filling in all those other puzzle pieces. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Sounds like fun. Mary, how about you?
Well, my business is a combination of Carry On Queen, the travel stuff, and my 5-minute marketing, my marketing stuff. And so I've been working pretty hard around the marketing stuff, and I'm looking forward to taking a little bit of time to relax over July and August. And I've got some speaking and stuff booked in the middle of all that. But what I am looking forward to, again, like Barb, traveling within BC. We've got a cabin up the Sunshine Coast, and so we'll be going up there and spending some time. But I just finished locking down, and it's going to be an absolutely fabulous trip with two other couples and another fellow. So there's 7 of us on a 45-foot Bavaria, and we're going to be chartering it and sailing around Desolation Sound at the end of August. And so this is somewhat of it's an amazing trip. I've done it before in our BK, before kids phase. My kids are now 18 and 21. So we're looking forward to getting back out there. But here's the real gift of this year. That's why I recognize it as an opportunity, because our borders are closed. And apologies to your American listeners, but because our borders are closed, all of the boat traffic that usually comes up from the Pacific Northwest into Canadian waters and goes up to Desolation Sound is not allowed up there this year. And what it means is that whole Desolation Sound, Sunshine Coast cruising area will be much less crowded. The anchorages will be there'll still be Canadians there, but at the end of August, I think it will be really quite amazing, a once-in-a-lifetime experience to have it without all of that additional traffic. And that, it's an outstanding place to cruise. And a 45-foot Bavaria is a 2019 45-foot Bavaria. I'm feeling very, it's going to be awesome with 3 other couples, and really looking forward to that. And that's money I'm spending back into the Canadian and the BC economy that quite likely I didn't have European plans this year, but that's going to take money from a budget that I quite likely would have spent within this year in international travel.
Yeah, like Barb, I was supposed to go to Portugal and then also Italy. And so that got canceled. My Croatia trip is a bike boat trip. So what they're doing to deal with all the COVID is they're going to have everything sanitized on the boat before we get there. And then they don't come in our rooms the whole time. So, and then in the bike, hopefully outdoors, that should be pretty safe. So if they let me in the country, I think it should actually be a pretty safe adventure.
No, so when was that?
It's scheduled for that's for the end of September, and I'm supposed to be hiking in the Dolomites with Active Adventures about 2 weeks earlier. So we'll see if I'm allowed in, and hopefully there won't be a quarantine between the two, because I won't have the time to do a quarantine. So everything's up in the air, but I know that the tour companies are modifying things. We're not going to restaurants, we're doing picnics. So they're adjusting everything that they can to keep us safe so that we can still travel if we're allowed in the country.
Well, good luck with that, because Croatia is as lovely as Portugal is. So I hope you get there.
And it won't be crowded.
That's right.
That's
right.
I think the travel industry is to be commended for all of the things that they're doing, right? They're in a tough spot. And so part of it is, as you're saying, is that we want to support them, right? We want to be able to do it and do it safely. And so good on you. I hope you're able to do it, Kit.
So, and like I said, and they are, like you were saying, because I'm working this week on a follow-up interview with some of my tour companies, that they are working double time at like no money or half money and all that, but they're slogging along, and they're so far so good. They're making it, and they say their customers have just been working with them and just postponing it. So I have hope for the future for the travel industry, but we're going to come through this a different world. But I appreciate you ladies coming on and telling us about COVID tracing and contact tracing. And I do agree with you. I think that's the way to go. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about it and hearing more about your adventures in the future. Thanks for coming on the program.
Awesome. Thanks,
Kit.
I sure appreciate Mary and Barb coming on the program and explaining contact tracing, that and the difference between that and exposure notification. And they opened my eyes to the fact that exposure notification may very well be the thing that safely, privately allows us to move forward, not just in traveling, but just in our life in this COVID world. So I hope you got a lot out of this. Please share it with friends, because this is going to be with us for a long time, I think. And the more educated we get, the better off I think we'll be. Barb and Mary have a great website, so I hope you'll check them out. And you'll see some great photos, see some interesting articles. And I also would like to give a special shout out to, I'm going to have to say, I'm not sure how I'm going to say this. It's Pilas and BC. I got a review from Pilas and BC that reads, solid and insightful advice, 5 stars. None of the informal and sometimes silly chatter on this podcast. Great work. Well, Pilas and BC, I appreciate the fact that you notice that I try not to have a lot of fluff in the program. Our time is valuable, so I don't want to waste it. So like you, I don't like to listen to podcasts with a bunch of rambling on for 15 minutes before the program even gets started. So I appreciate you taking the time to do the review and for being a listener to the program. And one final thing before I sign off, I'm getting ready, actually this morning as I'm recording this, to head out on my adventure with Sophie Girl, my camper van that I bought a few months ago that I'm finally going to take on her first adventure. If you want to follow on what's going on with Sophie and I, adventures and misadventures, be sure to join the Active Travel Adventures private Facebook group. That's where I will be posting and connecting with you as I'm traveling around the country. I would like to meet up with you if possible, and let's connect. So see you in the Facebook group. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.